Hello, my name is Michael Boyajian, and I'm going to be talking today on behalf of the Poughkeepsie Library District on my new book, Enoch Crosby, Master Spy of the American Revolution. The funny thing is about Enoch is that there has been no other books written about him other than his autobiography, which was a response to his fictional character in James Fenimore Cooper's The Spy. And the information for that book came from John Jay, who was the master spy for the region and who Enoch reported to. John Jay, of course, as we know, went on to be one of the founding fathers, signed the Declaration of Independence, and was a diplomat in Paris, and was also the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And so Enoch was in good company. He fought in Canada at the beginning of the war and then came home. He was a cobbler by trade. His family ran on hard times, and he had to pick up a trade, and he went into cobbling, which is really shoe repair and shoemaking. And his mentor, General Montgomery, was killed at the Battle of Quebec, and Enoch decided to get back into the war effort, and Washington's troops at that point were in White Plains. The British had chased them up to White Plains after the loss at the Battle of Brooklyn. And so Enoch decided to walk down there, and he took his cobbler's bag, which he took everywhere. It became his disguise when he became a spy. And along the way, he ran into another fellow who was heading down there, and he learned that this fellow was a loyalist. And so Enoch was a bit of a smooth-talking type of person, and he found out that the guy was a loyalist and that he was meeting a group of loyalists and that he had a whole list of loyalists operating in the region. So he got the information out of him and then reported it to the committee that John Jay headed, which was the spy committee. There were actually three, I'll come back to this in a minute. There are actually about three operations going on. There was the John Jay operation in the Hudson Valley. Across the river from where John Jay was operating was in Newburgh. Washington himself was operating a spy ring. And then down on Long Island, there was the famous Culper spy ring, which was getting information out of New York City, out to Long Island, Setauket to be exact, and then rowing the information across the Long Island Sound to Connecticut, and then bringing it overland to Washington. But as for Enoch, it turned out that the information was unbelievably good, and they arrested a lot of people, the American patriots. And that was his first operation. And John Jay knew a good person when he saw one, and he asked Enoch if he would like to be one of their regular spies. And Enoch said, I will be risking my life, but I will do it for my country. Earlier in the war, Nathan Hale was executed in New York City for being a spy. And he said, I regret having one life to give for my country. Now, I bring that up because it's going to pop up later on when Washington has to deal with Benedict Arnold and his betrayal at West Point. But let's get back to Enoch for now. So Enoch does the spy thing again. This time he goes to somewhere else in the Hudson Valley nearby, and he infiltrates another spy ring, and what happens is that he gets swept up with the spies as if he was a loyalist, and he is brought on the way to Fishkill, where they're going to be imprisoned in the Reformed Church there, which has been converted to a prison. They stop at Fort Montgomery, which the ruins can be visited today just north of Bear Mountain. And when he gets there, his former teacher sees him and becomes upset, thinking that he's a loyalist. And he can't say, no, I'm not a loyalist, I'm a spy. He has to go along with the fact that he's a loyalist to keep his cover. So his teacher learns about it, the whole community thinks he's a loyalist, and his family thinks he's a loyalist. So nobody likes him for some time. but he's actually doing great service for his country. Again, a lot of people get swept up in this raid, and he does a few more of these types of raids once he gets out of prison in Fishkill. In Fishkill, each captured person is brought before the committee, which included John Jay and a couple of other people. And when it's Enoch's turn, they bring him in and they all start laughing as if, hey, this is funny. We really pulled one off here. And they told him that he could escape by going out the window of the church out to a tree and climbing down the tree and then escaping to his next assignment, which was across the river. And he did that. He climbed out when everyone was asleep and escaped. And there was this one ranger. He was a patriot, but he didn't know that Enoch was on his side. He thought he was a loyalist, and he swore he was going to get him dead or alive. And for the rest of the war, he was hunted down by this one ranger. Anyhow, he again gets swept up, and he comes into contact with the ranger. He says, "You're not going to get away this time." And instead of putting him in the Reformed Church, they put him in a person's house. And the ranger is there, and the homeowner, and a woman, an unknown woman. And she turns out to be a patriot. And when everyone goes to sleep, she takes the key out of the ranger's vest pocket and releases Enoch, and he escapes again. And they can't figure out how he did it because she put the key back in, and no one knows how he did it. He just became something of a myth. Again, no one suspected he was a spy at all. Anyhow, his next thing is he goes to a tavern to try and get his next assignment. And while he's in there, people are talking about him, not knowing it's him standing there, because he's become a bit of a legend. And John Jay rides up to meet him on his horse and gets off and goes inside and realizes what's going on. And Enoch pretends to be petting the horse as John Jay gets on the horse, and John Jay whispers, "You've got to get out of here." And he flees and ends up at the home of a Dutch farmer. And he spends time there resting, and his next assignment he's sent north up to the Saratoga area, and he does his assignment there, and it's a success. By the way, the tavern was raided also, so that mission was a success for him also. Anyhow, him and a group of other people want to get home, and it's in the middle of winter, and they're struggling to get home back south to the Hudson Valley, and their clothes are ragged, their shoes are ragged. I mean, they're sleeping in pigsties, and they finally make it home, and again, he's given another assignment. At a certain point, he ends up at a relative's house in the Hudson Valley in the Highlands, and they can't find him. And at this time, after much contemplation, the loyalists realize that every time we get arrested and raided and everything, Enoch Crosby is there, and he ends up getting away. So they put two and two together and realize he's the spy. And so they go to the relative's house, and he won't cooperate. He won't tell them where Enoch is. And they beat him up, the loyalists beat him up. And he finally has to say he's in the hidden bedroom. There was a hidden bedroom in the house. And they knock the door down and go in, and then they point a weapon at Enoch. But Enoch is a strapping 6 foot tall. He's a great athlete. And he knocks the gun out, and he takes out his own gun and fires it. But it doesn't hit anybody, and they wrestled him to the ground, and they fight for a while, but they end up beating him up senseless and leaving him for dead. But he wasn't dead, and neither was his relative. And the forces that be, John Jay and everyone said, "Okay, you've done enough. Your life is in jeopardy no matter where you go in the Hudson Valley. The safest place for you is in the Continental Army." So he's re-enlisted into the Continental Army, and he's safe from the loyalists there because there's no way they can reach him when he's, in the army barracks for the Patriots. In any event, he spends the rest of the war in the Continental Army, and then he and his brother buy a farm after the war in Southeast, the town of Southeast in Westchester County, and he lives comfortably there for the rest of his days with his brother, and he ends up being the justice of the peace for the town also, and he and John Jay and Colonel Ludington, who is another story of valor in the Hudson Valley, along with his daughter Sybil, who was a patriot rider, rode further than Paul Revere in mobilizing the troops of Colonel Ludington's deployment and defeating the British at the Battle of Ridgefield, or forcing them into retreat at least. What this did is, with Colonel Ludington, is there were four prongs that the British wished to attack the Hudson Valley with, and separate it from New England, and also destroy the very important Fishkill Supply Depot, which was supplying all the operations for the Patriots in the Hudson Valley. In fact, without the Fishkill Supply Depot, you'd have no victory at Saratoga and no turning point in the war. What happens, though, is in Colonel Ludington's case, because of his daughter's great success in riding and mobilizing all of his troops, the British burned down Danbury, and on the way out there encounter Colonel Ludington's troops and other Connecticut troops, and are soundly put into retreat. So much so that the British say, well, we can never go that way into the Hudson Valley. That left three other directions. And Clinton, General Clinton of the British, wanted to come up the Hudson from the New York City area. Burgoyne was coming down from the north, and another British general, General St. Leger, was coming from the west. St. Leger met resistance at Fort Stanwix and was soundly defeated by General Herkimer, Patriot General Herkimer, at a battle near Fort Stanwix. And so that ended the western plunge into the Hudson Valley. Then we all know what happened with Burgoyne. He encountered the Patriots at Bennington in Vermont, and that was like a prequel to what was facing him at the two-pronged battle at Saratoga, which went from August to October and was two separate battles, one in each month. And he was defeated there, and Benedict Arnold was considered a great patriot for his service there, and that he turned the battle around and made it a victory for the Patriots. But that ended the northern push into the Hudson Valley, leaving Clinton, whose plan it was to do this invasion of the Hudson Valley to separate New England from the rest of the colonies, thinking that without the rebel rousers in New England to influence the rest of the colonies, the war would end. What happens is Howe, British General Howe, decides to go to Philadelphia. Okay, that's one misstep in coming up from New York City. So that leaves Clinton with his own forces, and he only goes as far as Kingston. He burns down Kingston, and where the Patriots are headquartered, and you can visit the Senate House there today. It's in nice order, and he ends up just turning around and going back down to New York City. So the Hudson Valley campaign is a total failure for the British. The Fishkill Supply Depot is left intact, and Washington is prepared for his grand strategy, which is to catch the British with their French allies, with the Americans' French allies, catch the British entire force at one location. And French General Burgoyne is headquartered in Connecticut and gets word that the French fleet is heading into Yorktown, and that the British forces are heading into Yorktown, and that it's time to move, and Washington gets to snap his trap. They head down south through the Hudson Valley, rendezvous with Rochambeau, and march rapidly into Yorktown and get their cannons pointed at the British. The British turn around, and there's the French fleet. They have nowhere to go. The entire force is forced to surrender, and that brings about the end of the war. Of course, the war didn't end immediately. They stopped fighting, and the Washington's forces went into quarters in the Cantonment outside of Newburgh today, in New Windsor, and you can visit there. And at one point there, his officers and troops wanted him to become a king, and he said, "Well, we just fought this whole war to become a king. I've got to talk these guys out of this. We can't have a king. We just fought a war against a king." And so he goes up before all the troops in what is called today the Temple of Virtue. It's a long town hall on the cantonment grounds, and he takes out a pair of glasses. Now, in those days, if you wore glasses, it was like you were disabled, like FDR in a wheelchair or something. And what he says is, "I've grown old in the service of my country." And this brings all the troops and officers to tears because this is their superhero, and he has to wear glasses now because of all he sacrificed for them in fighting the British. And that ends the mutiny, and we know the story from there. As for Enoch, again, he retired with his brother into the Westchester County area and lived a comfortable life. One other story about Washington: he had one spy, it wasn't Enoch, who was so deep cover that people didn't even believe that he was a patriot. They refused to believe it. He was hated, and he finally went to Washington and said, "Look, you got to do something. I'm going to get killed." This is after the war. What can you do for me? And Washington says, "I'm going to give you a medal." And he creates this heart-shaped medal. And it's the first time in the history of warfare that a non-officer or a non-aristocrat is given a medal for valor in a military operation. And it's heart-shaped, and he gives it to the spy. And then from that point on, people believe that he is a patriot because Washington himself gave him the medal. And again, like I said, it's so fantastic because no regular person ever got a medal. It was always aristocrats and officers, worldwide. And this medal turned into eventually what is today known as the Purple Heart. And if you go to the cantonment, they have a museum dedicated to the Purple Heart. And that is basically most of the story of Enoch Crosby. The book is available on Amazon, and you can also get it at Oblong Books or Barnes & Noble as well. Thanks for listening, and thanks to the Poughkeepsie Library for having me speak. Thank you, and goodbye.